And great. So I'm going to talk a bit about the perspective that informs my research. And sorry, did that just go away? Okay. And with some examples from my doctoral dissertation, which is what a lot of my published work kind of is derived from because it took me many years to finish. But so yeah, so but before I proceed, maybe I could introduce myself. Um, so my although my background is in archaeology, I'm probably more accurately described as a scholar of scientific practice with a deep focus on archaeology specifically. My primary research interests are concerned with practical aspects of archaeological data work and the formation of archaeological data commons. I'm especially interested in how open infrastructures uh, and policies impact research practice and the tensions between institutional and community driven aspects of research. Put another way, I look at how we set up systems to scaffold the flow of information and how these systems operate uh, in practical and collaborative research environments. Although I'm primarily interested in archaeology and, and heritage-oriented humanities disciplines, I'm doing very similar work in context of health research, data management, which have their own unique and their unique challenges that are very different from, but just as challenging as the issues I observe in archaeological research. So there are a few other things that I do that kind of bleed into, like this bleeds into other things I do. So for instance, in 2018, I started openarcheo.info, which is a fairly comprehensive list of open source archaeological software and resources developed by and for archaeologists. I still maintain it, and it even serves as a data set for analysis of collaborative software development practices, along with my colleague Joe Rowe, who many of you might be familiar with, and that was published in Internet Archaeology, which is again hosted, which is a product of your department. So very thankful for that. Um, I also co-founded and oh, and at the same time, I also lead work on diamond.openarcheo.info, which is a similar resource, but listing diamond open access archaeology journals. I co-founded and co-moderate the Archaeosocial Mastodon server and alternative social media collective, which is a great replacement for Twitter and Blue Sky. And I'm very proud of my recent work coordinating the inaugural Digital Archaeology Maintainathon, which was a week-long event in January uh, for archaeologists to and to learn about and make visible underappreciated aspects of archaeological software maintenance. Or archaeological software development, specifically focusing on maintenance and sustainability issues. I'm also collaborating with Julie Lund and Isak Rolkom at University of Oslo and Aarhus University, respectively, on a building metric analysis of Viking Age research, which examines published work relating to the origins of the Viking Age and attempts to draw a meaningful feminist critique regarding how different voices are being represented in the literature. And of course, there are things I do with relating to my work at the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at McGill, including analysis, operational email correspondence within a major data sharing initiative. And there are other scattered things I do that I certainly don't have time to talk about. But in general, there's just kind of like this magpie kind of attitude that, even though I'm not currently working in archaeology, although I really want to come back, this is kind of instilled in me. Um, but the reason why I can't talk about those things is because I really want to talk about data and especially different overlapping notions of data that we often refer to interchangeably. Um, so it turns out when archaeologists say the word data, they mean a few different things. One way they tend to think about data is as a descriptive accounts of observed phenomenon, so consistent and precise records about objects or phenomena used to document the state of a thing through a series of relevant properties. In this context, data is going to follow a data model that delimits what's relevant, and it will always paint an incomplete picture. A second notion of data presents them as evidence that forms the basis for a claim. In an analytical context, data are always fixed and stable and precede the analysis. In other words, this notion of data is that which grounds interpretations in reality. And a third notion of data, which is arguably the most important in the context of my work, presents data as a means of communicating observations from one set of circumstances to another. So the records made about objects of interest, which are inscribed upon some medium and that can be consulted, accessed, or used as stand-ins for the objects that they have been constructed to represent. This perspective tends to acknowledge the material circumstances under which data were collected, and therefore presents the data as outcomes of decisions and actions rather than as reflections of stable knowledge. This third notion of data is especially useful for enabling us to think about data as an outcome of collective effort. And in this sense, data are cast as outcomes of social and collaborative interactions, and it is possible to investigate the so-called rules that govern who may contribute to and extract from these commons and in what ways. Or rules is, and maybe conventions is a better way to describe this. So to be clear, these are not mutually exclusive definitions. Data are and can be all of these things at the same time, and people even refer to all these aspects of data in the same breath. Pulling these apart enables us to articulate what people value about data in different contexts, though. This communicative aspect of data has a few key implications that should be touched on. First, language is more than just formal specifications of words in a dictionary. We are not computers running on the same protocols. Second, as with all things of anthropogenic origin, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that the records that archaeologists produce carry traces of the social and material worlds that scaffold the communities that produce them. So one thing that's always embedded in my approach is questioning how internalized norms, values, and expectations influence how we collect and communicate our data. And third, like with all communication in a general sense, some degree of improvisation is necessary to adapt to local and changing circumstances. All archaeological encounters are different, and yet we must render them consistent. We must render them consistently through abstract. We should render them. We should have some sort of consistency with them through abstraction. At the same time, we adapt local situations on a pragmatic basis, which is made possible by our ability to parse context and subtext based on communal lived experiences. So these things enable us to strike a healthy balance between capturing what we deem important in the moment, while also ensuring that data remain useful for extended use down the line. These principles apply throughout archaeological practice, not just in digital or data domains. And I want to share an example where I observed a field worker come up with an ingenious hack to extend the length of a rod so he could take better measurements. I'll take a moment to read this quote in full, so just bear with me for a moment. But so this is from my field notes, doing observations of research practice in a field project. So after hammering in the rebar and vertically aligning the string, is only level at the point that it is only at a level point that is only level at a point that is higher than the rebar. So you have to have the string on top to actually measure the distance from the string to the surface to sort of get an accurate measurement of the elevation. So the field worker told me to grab the other rebar in the corner, though it was massive and much thicker, and he tried hammering it in, but it was clear that it would get blown down by the wind. I offered to hold it steady, but instead he told me to rummage in his bag and find a nail and a masking tape. I mean, I guess you call it tape something different, adhesive tape. He attached the long nail to the rebar, adding 4 to 5 inches to its length. He then proceeded with my assistance to tie the string around the nail, clip it on securely, and secure the line down with a rock. Regarding securing down the line down with a rock, this is field notes, so my writing was very stilted. This was a challenge as well, and this was a challenge from yesterday, as well as when I did this for the earlier section this morning. I needed to find the right kind of rock, which was not too big, but still dense. It needed to be not too rough, but with sharp angular corners. This was never made explicit. After 2 failed attempts, first with a large rugged rock and then with a smaller, less rugged rock, he picked up one and gave it to me, saying something like this. I wound the string around the rock, leaving some slack, and then positioned the rock in a way that would render the line taut by rotating it or securing around others. So I look at data work as an extension of this way of thinking, it's a cooperative, pragmatic series of actions driven by loose goals and mitigated by norms that dictate the limits of acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. In this sense, it's a very natural extension of archaeological work in the general sense. So when you start thinking in this way, you begin to see lots of really interesting things. So I'll show you some findings from a recent paper published in Advances in Archaeological Practice to show you what I mean. I'll focus primarily on a string of episodes during which Jane, a promising trench assistant, working as at an archaeological project, learned to identify, differentiate, and document parts of a stratigraphic sequence. And this will illustrate how the constitution of the archaeological record and the internalization of archaeological knowledge occurred as part of as part of project frameworks and collaborative relations that were structured by divisions of labor. And just a brief note that these are all pseudonyms during my research ethics protocol. It's just I can't really use people's real names, but these are all real experiences. In this little video or GIF, Jane explained to me how she identified and differentiated a new context that she was beginning to expose in her trench, using a series of gestures paired with speech to help convey what she meant to say. And by the way, I put like cameras on their heads for this, so it was kind of a novel thing at the time, but so that's kind of how you get this kind of POV gonzo perspective. But here's a more simplified view, I guess. She kicked the boulders as she referred to them, literally pointed out relations to previous experiences that she deemed relevant, and described certain aspects of the soil by miming the ways that she would interact with them. She referred to common nomenclature outlined in the project standard recording schema, and referenced and she referenced and that schema was referenced by more experienced personnel, and she drew from her experiences working in other trenches that others may have that other people were also part of. More generally, she described the context change only in terms of her interactions with it, and as framed by her particular role in the project. Afterward, Jane consulted with Basil, who supervised work in this trench, and who was also the project director, regarding her interpretation of the soil in it. Jane explained what she saw in terms of her encounters with the entities she identified, while punctuating her observations her observation with physical gestures that underscored certainty that the entities she was observing actually exist. Basil came to take a closer look. He hopped in the trench and translated Jane's situated experiences into more nominal and normalized terms that distanced the observer from the observed entities. Basil then identified a series of actions that Jane must implement and summarized the situation by joining what was observed with what was to be done about it. In effect, rendering a conclusive and well-reasoned decision. All the while, Jane confirmed her understanding of Basil's corrections and of his specific instructions. This conversation, therefore, served as a way of calibrating their experiences using an independent framework as a common reference point. Later on, Jane told me how she came to sort of train her eye, quote unquote, well, literally, sorry, verbatim quote, to see these differences by observing how other senior members of the project did it. Her internalization of the broader conceptual framework aligned her own vision as part of a collectively held way of perceiving the world, which was led by authoritative actors who exhibit greater control. Like you see here, she says she picked out things that they want you to pick out. It's easier now, but hearing Alfred, who was one of the site directors, pointing out, hearing Basil pointed out, who's the site director. So Alfred was the field director, Basil was the site director. Hearing different supervisors pointing it out, it kind of produces a form of knowledge. So it also rendered her own unique experiences as generic contributions to the project's information commons, which had the effect of reducing her individual agency while also drawing her into a class of related agents serving similar data collection functions, i.e. student laborers. And it reframed her embodied and sensory experiences as a matter of information modeling, which occurs outside material space and circumstantial moments in time. I should note that Jane did not actually object to the reduction of her situated experience in favor of more generic forms of presenting the stratigraphy. In fact, This conformed with the pattern of behavior, which was enacted by all the field workers I spoke with, um, whereby they tried not to think too much while excavating, opting instead to operate in the moment, face the task at hand, and deal with what is immediately in front of them, literally and figuratively. This conformed with the expectation that the things an excavator uncovers will gradually reveal themselves and that she should passively follow what is occurring in the earth before her. Field workers modify their work environments to help accomplish this. Some field workers focus better while listening to music or while blocking out social distractions. Ben, who worked as an assistant in a separate trench, said that listening to music helped them avoid being too self-aware, while Jane concurred by expressing that she listened to music to literally get lost in digging. Even when, or to literally say that she got lost in digging, sorry, pardon. Even when music was not used or when it was forbidden on site, there was always a warrant um, for field workers to remain focused while they worked. For instance, Basil, the senior project director, recalled that what he characterized as an old-fashioned archaeological work practices, which dictate that the only sound you should hear is trowel on stone. Having all the necessary tools at hand was another way to facilitate uninterrupted focus during field work, as is kind of indicated through this third quote by Lauren, to help reduce the eliminate peripheral sensory distractions when getting up and reaching for the tools placed further away. So in effect, field workers were made to become disembodied sensing devices, attuned to one thing and one thing only, the soul immediately in front of them. Um, Overall, these observations both complement and contradict efforts to enhance reflexivity in field work. The professed desire to not overthink while excavating pushes back against the impulses to provide more information to field workers during the moment of excavation and aid in their interpretation of the trowel's edge. According to field workers Theo and Ben, field workers operate in a strictly separate role than those who interpret and write about finds, and this boundary feels natural to them. Rather than ingesting loads of additional information, which involves learning how to make sense of all and find it meaningful and practical sense, the field workers I spoke with went in the opposite direction. They valued their extremely focused experiences with material, which presented them with a unique and proprietary way of knowing that dissipated as they were forced to detach themselves from the archaeological encounter. This means of engagement felt more natural to them, as if unmuddied by reflexive thought. And the field workers I spoke with perceived this as a strength, actually. It should also be emphasized that this is a systemic issue and does not reflect individual archaeologist skills or abilities. This is evident by remarkable consistency across responses, which, regardless of their degree of experience, is a consistency across responses, regardless of degree of experience, which indicated that they were all intuitively and explicitly aware of the fact that that all observation is subjective, and that records carry biases imposed by practical circumstances of their creation. However, all respondents acknowledged that they were unable to grapple with this or enact change through their own individual actions. Nor are these observations intended to demonize or pass negative judgment on the project's leaders. Um, or the database managers who are similarly constrained by systemic pressures to generate forms of knowledge that are valued by the scientific enterprise. In turn, this involves balancing attention between sharing concrete records about archaeological observations while accounting for situated actions, decisions and actions that contribute to their creation. So, in all of this, there's a clear tension between approaches that seek to stay to seek the papers that seek stable outputs is that seek to balance stable and storied outputs. So it's evident that the production of stable and concrete archaeological records involve characterizing the phenomena of interest in nominal terms, while downplaying the situated and embodied experience that informed the record's creation. Specifically, there is a tendency to enforce formally defined records in support of analytical tasks down the line, which presents fieldwork as a means to an end, and field workers as instruments that can be wielded to support future analytic endeavors. This is instilled through the social and material experiences in which fieldwork is embedded, which informs field workers about how their labor and the outcomes of the labor contribute to collective efforts. In other words, it became very clear in my work that the management of archaeological data and of archaeological labor are inherently intertwined. So there's some implications for thinking about data documentation, and the potential for data to be reused in secondary contexts at greater distance from the context of creation. So my informed opinion is that low rates of data reuse are due to general inability to communicate directly with data sets creators to ascertain the subtext hidden between the lines of their formal documentation. Effective data sharing must therefore involve some discursive relationship between those who produce and reuse data to overcome the epistemic distance imposed by layers of abstraction. Um, it's therefore quite ironic that, although some people in the room might disagree, it's a bit ironic that the formal and transactional protocols meant to streamline mutual comprehension of a data set reveal both their inadequacy for achieving their stated purpose as well as the strengths of the system that they're meant to produce or meant to replace. Sorry. So having the ability to actually talk to people about the data, like having like at the conference bar about what actually happened, that's kind of lost, or it's a bit lost when you're sort of everything when you could sort of instantly download it or upload it. Um, but it doesn't have to be a black and white situation. Archaeologists regularly manage to obtain meaningful insights in spite of these tensions. And indeed, the fact that archaeologists are able to do this at all and get this subtext while also having these superstructures is all incredible. And it's really the reason why I do this research. It's fascinating to me that the fact that we are able to sort of get this context and subtext while also treating things as very like confident, concrete records. This is just it's you don't see this everywhere. As someone who now works in health research, that people do take data at face value and don't value subtext. And it's quite interesting that archaeologists are actually very far ahead in this subtlety, in being nimble, and able to sort of pick things up and be aware of their limitations while also wanting to do something more with the data. It's a very unique kind of pragmatism. Um, and this again is because I think it falls from field work. It's because there's a like with the hammering a rebar, like taping a nail to a rebar, it's an extension of an existing way of thinking. But what's even more fascinating is the sheer variety of creative ways in which archaeologists navigate this tension. So in response to the question that how do archaeologists achieve this, there are actually lots and lots of ways. There's like extreme variety. Um, so smaller scale and community-driven data sharing initiatives are capable of assembling technical apparatus and community governance structures to manage collective contributions to collective resources, albeit perhaps with relatively limited scope. And hopefully, if some of my plans come to fruition, I'll be able to sort of continue this research along these lines, looking at comparative analysis of numerous cases, possibly even like 12 or 13 cases, including large initiatives like the ADS and Open Context, as well as smaller projects like the Levantine Ceramics Project, the Kronos Radiocarbon Database, and even Sebastian Heath's solo experiments that apply semantic web technologies to a spreadsheet of Roman amphitheaters. So, for instance, Kronos, this project led by Joe Rowe and Martin Haynes in Kiel and Copenhagen, or Copenhagen and Kiel, respectively, is very much based in, like providing a provenance to, like it assembles radiocarbon dates into a very structured way with an API, and is very concerned with referencing the provenance, the original papers in which each radiocarbon result that each radiocarbon result comes from. Whereas other works like uh, and, and they collaborate with people who have basically made giant lists of radiocarbon databases because they don't want to repeat this work and they actually want to engage with people who already understand the nuances of this. So there's a collaborative aspect that they're already leveraging this kind of this history of assembling lists of radiocarbon dates. And I think that's really fascinating. And you can compare that with, the Levantine Ceramics project, which is, from my understanding, I could be wrong about this, I want to learn about it, is basically it started off as a giant spreadsheet, a shared spreadsheet that eventually developed a editorial pipeline for getting field workers to share their ceramics registries, And now I think they're even publishing, they just published their first volume, but it has a very editorial mode. It's just kind of meeting where, where fieldwork based, find specialists kind of know you submit something to a journal, you submit something and they get approved. There's a meeting people where they're at. This is natural, familiar to them. So they develop both a technical apparatus and a governance structure that matches what people expect. And even the other example I use is Sebastian Heath's Roman amphitheaters data set, which is just basically a GeoJSON file on GitHub. But it's interesting because it's really just an exercise in learning in a way, because at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World in New York, they have a really interesting program on semantic web. They've been doing that for over a decade. And it's not like you're finding a new amphitheater every day or every other day even. So you're just really trying to enhance the data set, extend it outward. And I think that's a really interesting use case, but he doesn't really have to collaborate except in the sense that he has to sort of ensure that these semantic webs are maintained, that these semantic links rather are maintained. Um, so what all these kind of initiatives have in common is that they are small, bounded initiatives driven by core teams that are genuinely interested in the work and do have pre-existing ties to the communities that produce the data. And in this sense, they are essentially just normal research collaborations. Ergo, if I were to get funded to this work, which, on fingers crossed, I will be in a position to test whether sharing data works best when it is rooted in close collaborative ties rather than in extremely distant transactional exchanges. And the results may prompt us to reconsider why we feel the urge to formalize and genericize our data collection processes, and to consider what happens during various kinds of collaborative jumps, including those that connect the fruits of someone like Jane's labor when extended applications further away from the travel's edge. So I think on that note, I'll conclude. I don't know how well I am on time, but thank you. I'll take questions if you have any.
Well, thank you so much. Let me get to the screen.